Hi, welcome to the Quickstarter segment of this course. The idea of this is just to give you a very short summary and basically show you some ideas to get started with the lines. There are the course files which covers everything in great depth, and along with that, you can also refer to the model games and the typical plans and structures section where we create a summary of these lines in much more depth, which is reasonable enough for you to memorize it and deep enough for you to grasp all the important ideas. This is where we'll be just touching base with the systems and you're just trying to understand what's going on strategically in a position and the thought process behind what I am trying to provide you in this course. So after D4, D5, we basically have, we'll be covering all the lines here, but the main four systems in this position is the Manhattan system with knight f3, knight f6, knight c3. There is knight c3, knight f6, cd, ed, bishop g5, bishop b4, which I call the Gukesh QGD. You can also call it accelerated Ragozin. Then there is the London system. And finally, the Catalan after c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3. Let's start by going through the Manhattan system, which is by far, I think, the most important system in the 1d4 space. But yeah, of course, the other lines are critical, but you should have a core around those knight f3, knight c3 setups first, and then decide what you want to do with the other lines. So we start by looking at d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3. I'm sorry, knight c3. This is the starting point of our course. And after knight b d7, we can take a small pause and discuss about this position in general. I cover this part in the typical plans and sections, typical plans and structures part as well, but I'll just make another summary for you here. So basically with knight bd7, you want to play bb4, which if you had played at this point would have allowed queen a4 check. With knight bd7, you don't want to meet queen a4 check and you want to play bishop b4 on the next move. The ideas in general here is that you are going to play very actively and you are going to make threats directly on this diagonal and in the center. The knight will usually jump up to the e4 square as well. In some rare lines, we'll also play h6 g5 against white's bishop g5. This is rare, but it happens. So bishop g5 is white's most ambitious move here and also the main line in this position. White develops the bishop to the most active diagonal. We play bb4 and bring out our bishop to the active diagonal as well. Now we are exerting some pressure on the a5 e1 diagonal. White plays e3 to open up the diagonal for the bishop and then subsequently castle. And we play c5 and start striking in the center. If you notice, all of our moves from the last some moves, yeah, like we are constantly either trying to bring a new piece into the game or we are trying to challenge the center. We are not spending any unnecessary time. Now, the lines which we will cover here are cd5 and bd3. cd5 is the main move. Basically, after ed5, black has to create an isolated pawn, which is what white players think that, from a strategic viewpoint, white now already has a better pawn structure. If white had played bishop d3 instead, we can release the tension in the center and force white to create an isolated pawn. And because of bishop d3, white has to spend additional tempo on taking on c4. Now, a very useful advice in these positions is whenever your opponent's bishop is on g5, in these QGD setups, the lines which I am proposing, you can always go for h6. And we go for h6 here. We force the bishop to go back, then castle, castle, and the queen is in pin, which is slightly annoying as that means we can't move our knight, and thus we play queen a5, getting the queen out of the pin and also threatening bishop c3. White players usually play rook c1 here, and then we take on c3. bc3 means white would have a poor pawn structure, and after b5 followed by bb7, all of our pieces are getting into the action. White has many weaknesses on the queen side, which will be our target. And even after rook c3, we play b5, trying to get our bishop out. And from a strategic viewpoint, sure, white has the pair of bishops, but we in turn have the better pawn structure since the d4 pawn is weak and a great outpost on d5. Also, once the bishop lands on b7, our pieces will be very active too. So this looks like a very good position for black. Let's go back to move 7, where instead of bishop d3, white can try c into d5. Here we take back with the pawn, and although we have less space in the center, we have a poor pawn structure in the center. The thing which really helps us now is that the diagonal for our bishop is opened up. And secondly, white has given up center control, which means if we are able to play c4, this pawn would not be a weakness, but then a strength because we'll have more space in the center and there will be no way for white to attack this. There are two critical moves here. There is d into c5 and there is bishop d3. Let's start by checking d into c5, which is strategically the most ambitious move. White immediately targets the weakness on d5. Do we take back and spend some time? No. We start by playing queen a5 and threatening white's knight on c3. I'm sorry for that. The other idea is to play knight e4 and then take with the knight so that white has forced to take with the pawn and then we take back with the bishop, subsequently winning the rook. White has to play rook c1 therefore to defend this knight and also keep pressure on the pawn on d5. We still go for knight e4, threatening knight to c3. Now, if white is slow, we'll play knight c3 or knight c5. We are also threatening knight g5 by the way. So, from a strategic viewpoint, things will already be in our favor. So, white needs to take up the challenge and play queen d5. White is now a couple of pawns up, but we win back a pawn in the matter of 2 moves, and we are just a pawn down, and white is forced to play king d1, which means that white can't castle anymore, thus compromising on the king safety. And this is a good position to evaluate from a strategic viewpoint, let's say after castles. So our king is very safe while white's king is weak, and if we are able to somehow get our pieces into the action, we'll already be winning this position. Because we are threatening knight f6 or knight c5, white is forced to play bishop c4, and that's the only challenging move in here. White's idea is to play bishop e7 and win this rook, which we meet by playing b5. A very strong novelty, but let's try to understand why we play b5 before going very deep into that. So ideally we would have loved to play knight c5, but the issue is after bishop e7, b6, bishop into f8, we have lost the rook and we can't play bishop e6 to target this bishop because of queen into a8 and we'll quickly lose the game. Secondly, knight f6 isn't great either because after bishop f6, king e2, there is no bishop obstructed on f1 unlike the previous positions, and white has got the king to a very safe square, like it's not easy to attack it. If you go bishop e6, the queen goes back. You can't take on c4 because after queen c4, the queen defends everything. And with b5 here on 13th move, what we are saying is, firstly, white can't take on a8 because we'll win this bishop. And the light square bishop in these positions is much more important than the rook on the corner of the board. With the bishop gone, suddenly the weaknesses on the queen side and in the center are glaring, and you have the queen as well as the bishop to attack it. We have ideas of queen a4 check or queen a2, and in fact this is already winning for black. So if white goes bishop b3 here, we now play knight f6. There are some lines we should just have a look into. Firstly, it makes sense to check queen a8. The idea is white wins a rook, but after rook d8, king e2, king c2, bishop f5 will soon lead to a mate or huge material losses for white. King e2, and now we play b4. And the motif is very, very similar to a line which we'll just check. So coming back to move 15, White can also play bishop f6, where we don't want to take back with the bishop, as the bishop was quite active here. So we spoil our pawn structure, but keep an active bishop on c3. We are prioritizing our activity in these positions. With gf6, the bishop is on c3. Also, we have some weaknesses on the king side, but white just doesn't have the pieces to attack those weaknesses. And secondly, we have huge mating ideas set up right in the center of the board. So if white goes for queen a8 in these positions and tries to win a rook, we play rook d8, king e2, and now we go for b4, opening up the diagonal for the bishop and threatening checkmate in one move or two moves. So bishop c4, and I think this a lot of people would stop checking the lines here since white covers the a6 square. But now we have the brilliant queen a2. And the point is, after bishop a2, bishop a6, bishop c4, bishop c4, the king is checkmated right into the center, and white is up a queen and a rook, a queen and an exchange, but you're just mated right in the center of the board. No matter how much extra material you have, if your king is mated, there's nothing white can do. And I think this is one of the most impressive pieces of opening prep I have seen. And somehow, it's very interesting that white can get mated in 20 moves in a line which is very principled and at the same time unexplored. And this was one of the lines which actually motivated me to create this course. Let's go back to move number 8, where white goes for bishop d3. So white brings out a bishop and says that, hey, I'll just focus on my development. I don't want to create a isolated pawn on d5 right now, since my development is not complete. Fair enough, but now we can start attacking the weaknesses. And after queen c2, we play c4 and gain space in the center. This is our point that, okay, if you don't spend time on dc5, I'll gain space in the center, and I'll not give you the opportunity to create it further down the road. Now white needs to play bishop f5 here, since bishop e2 leaves the control of the important e4 square. Bishop f5, we castle, white does the same. Now white wants to play e4 and open up the position, as white's pieces are more active, but we have more space. So if we are able to contain e4 and finish our development, we'll be better in this position from a strategic viewpoint. Thus, we play rook e8 and stop white from pushing e4. The main line in here is knight d2, where white renews the threat of playing e4, and we play g6, force the bishop to make a decision. So bishop into d7, knight into d7 will give us the pair of bishops. Then we'll just try to bring out our pieces and attack white's weaknesses on the queen side. While for bishop h3, we go king g7, defend this knight so that knight b6 is a possibility. In such QGD positions, we would like to exchange the light square bishop, which is the worst place piece for us in these kind of positions. So after king g7, we'll be covering two moves here. There is bishop h4 and there is rook e1. Let's start by checking bishop h4, where white wants to get out of the attack after knight e4. No problem. We'll play knight b6 and try to exchange of that light square bishop. So if white plays bishop c8 and we play rook a c8, and we have a dream position where we keep the control of the e4 square and keep extra space. White's best try here is the imaginative knight b3, with the idea that after cb3, ab3, our queen is trapped. Interesting. But if we have to give up the queen, let's pick up as much material as we can in the process. Bishop into c3. White can't take this bishop as our queen escapes, so rook a5 is forced. But now we have two minor pieces and a rook for the queen. So white's main move here is queen c5. Otherwise, these three pieces are stronger than the queen. So white has to try and grab it back. But queen c5 is bad because we have bishop h3. Okay, logical. Gh3. And if we lose a piece here, it's a problem. But now we have the very strong g5, with the idea that if white plays bishop g5, we play knight e4 and win back the bishop, thus keeping the extra material. And if white goes bishop g3, we go bd2 and defend the bishop with knight e4 next. Bishop e for bishop e5, we play rook e6, threatening rook c6. And we have a very comfortable advantage in this position. Let's go back to move number 14th, where white goes for rook e1. White brings out the last piece into the game and now wants to try and open up the position, and we shut it down with knight e4. We can't allow e4 break to happen because we have less space in the position. Knight into e4. Knight c4 isn't great, as after d4 we have a double attack. So knight e4, d4. The bishop moves, bishop f4, and now we go for knight f6. We are trying to keep the control of the center, and if we are able to play bishop c3 and knight d5 next, we'll have an amazing position because of the space in the center and better pawn structure. White therefore has to stop us from doing that and can do that in two ways, either with f3 or bishop e5. Let's start by checking f3, where white is immediately trying to open up the center, but we are not bothered and just take, and after takes play bishop c3, bc3 and knight e4. If we are able to consolidate with queen d5, we'll have a great position here. White therefore has to stop that by playing bishop e5 check, but after rook e5, d5 and queen c3, we now get a passed pawn, which is going to be a protected passed pawn in no time. And this endgame is very comfortable for us because this majority can't do anything on the king side since white has a pair of double pawns, while this majority is very, very dangerous to deal with. If white plays a3, we play b5 and a5, b4, and thus then just roll pawns. Black is already much, much better in this position. Coming back to move number 18, where white can try playing bishop e5. White wants to play knight e4 on the next move or bishop into f6. And here we give up the exchange with rook e5 to keep the control in the center and at the same time activate our pieces. We now want to start an attack on the king side with h5, h4, knight g4, or maybe get the bishop into the game as well. Now we are threatening also to improve our rook with rook d8, so white usually tries rook d1. a3 isn't effective as bishop a5 is a good inclusion for us. This bishop is stronger on the c7 square since it does not obstruct the d file and at the same time is useful for b5, b4 break. For rook d1, we go h5 and then we are going to start an attack on the king side. If white goes rook d1 and we still go bishop a5 voluntarily. The idea is white was threatening rook d4 and try winning this pawn, and with bishop a5, rook d4 is never an issue since the d4 square is covered, as well as queen d2, queen d4 is not a problem since after rook d8, the bishop covers the important d8 square. We are now threatening to pierce into the center of the board with rook d3 and pose uncomfortable questions to white. White therefore tries a4 in this position to stop b5, but after h5, we have the usual compensation in terms of activity and space in the center. And yeah, that sums up the Manhattan system. To sum it up in brief, we are always looking to put our pieces on active squares, and we are looking to make threats with every single move. That brings us to the Catalan system now. Let's go back to move number 4. So the Catalan starts with 4g3 move order. White wants to place the bishop on g2 and claim that the bishop is on the most active diagonal, and let's just place our pieces on the best possible squares. Great strategy, but the drawback is that the pawn on c4 will be weak. We play bishop e7, and after bishop g2, we finish our kingside development with castles, and now we play dc4. In these Catalan positions, we either try to preserve our pawn on c5, on c4, or challenge white center with c5. These are the two plans we have here. And there are now three critical moves which we are going to look into. There is queen c2, the main move. There is queen a4, and then there is knight e5. Let's start by checking queen c2. The main move, white wants to recapture the pawn and keep extra space thanks to the pawn on d4. We don't want to allow that, and thus we play b5, preserving the pawn. e6 is the main line in the position, but after queen c4 or a4, white has some advantage thanks to the extra space. We are not able to challenge with b5 easily, and in general, it's a great line if you are looking to make a draw and stay very solid. But we are ambitious here. We want to make threats with all of our moves, and therefore we play b5. After a4, we play b4 and gain more space. The most principled and logical move in this position is knight f d2, opening up the diagonal for the bishop and threatening to take on c4 with the knight so that white occupies an outpost. We go for knight d5 and block this diagonal, and after knight c4, white has some space which we look to undermine with c5. And this is a great position to discuss about strategy. We have more space, but the issue is white has some tactical motives. While if we are able to bring out our minor pieces and finish our development, we stand better thanks to the activity of our pieces and the control of the center. So in this quick starter course, we are going to look at e4 or d into c5, the main move. Let's start by checking out e4. This is less played since it blocks the diagonal of the bishop. We go knight b6 and increase the pressure over the c4 knight and the pawn on d4. White usually plays knight b6. Since dc5, bishop c5, okay, this is possible, but transposes to one of the lines we cover via the 11th dc5 move order, this one. So e4, knight b6, knight b6, and we don't take with the queen, which makes our pieces a bit shaky after dc, bc, and e5. The point is after knight c6, white has a5, queen b5, and bishop e3, a very, very concrete sequence with the idea that bishop into e3 runs into bishop into c6 with a double attack. Therefore, we prioritize activity of our pieces and play ab6, making the foundation of the c5 pawn stronger and opening up the file for our rook. After dc5, now we take back with the bishop and activate our bishop. White usually plays e5 to stop us from playing knight c6, knight d4, where we play rook a7 and try to swing the rook with rook c7 next. We are constantly trying to bring all of our pieces into the game and put them on active squares. After knight d2, rook c7, we'll play bishop a6 or knight c6, knight d4 and have a great game thanks to the activity of our pieces. Coming back to move 11th with dc5, we take back with our bishop. Now the idea is we just want to develop our pieces logically with bishop a6, knight d7 or rook c8 and put pressure on white's queen side, especially along the c5. If white tries to win a pawn with rook d7, rook d1, knight d7 and bd5, we take on d5 and after rook d5 play bb7 where the bishops are monstrous. After rook d1, queen c8, with the idea of queen c6, white's king is in huge trouble and in fact white is not able to defend this position. That brings us an end to the main line with 7th queen c2. Let's go back and check out 7th queen a4 next. So after dc4, let's now check queen a4, which stops us from playing b5 and has the same idea of taking on c4. Now the main move here again is a6, but I found this very new idea of playing queen d5, trying to preserve the pawn. The idea is very simple. We want to play b5 next and greedily keep the pawn. White players usually play knight c3 here to attack the queen with a tempo, where we go back to c6 and ask white if they want to trade the queens. If white plays queen c6, the knight comes out with a tempo and we remain a pawn up. So white players usually go back to c2, and now white has ideas of knight e5 and knight c4. We therefore play queen a6, vacate the c6 square for our knight, and at the same time keep an eye on the weak pawn on c4. There are two moves which we should check here. There is e4 and there is bishop g5. After bishop g5, we play knight c6. h6 is also fine, and we transpose to one of the lines we cover in the course. But knight c6 is even better, as we immediately threaten and put pressure on the pawn on d4. All we want to do next is get our pieces out with rook d8 and then play b5, bb7, finish our development and retain that extra pawn. So white players usually play e4 here and gain more space in the position, where we play knight c6, bring out our knight and try to attack the pawn on d4. White plays play a3 here, since the other idea was to play knight b4, knight d3 and occupy the outpost on d3. After a3, this square on b3 has weakened the square on b3 is weakened, which we can try to exploit with knight a5 at some point. This is one of the plans we have, but unfortunately, white is threatening bishop g5 and e5, and after knight a5, we lose control of the bishop on e7. Therefore, we start by playing h6, which is a novelty, and we stop bishop g5. And once white plays e5, we play knight d5 with the idea of playing knight a5 and b5 on the next move. White's critical response, therefore, is queen e4 to stop us from playing that by attacking our bishop. And now we play a fascinating move, bishop d8, with the idea of meeting knight d5, e d5, queen d5, with knight e7, and then occupying the weak light squares in the center of the board. So after queen e4, queen c5 isn't great, as after c6, followed by bishop e6, knight d5, the queen is kind of stuck and might get trapped somewhere here. Therefore, white has to play queen e4, but that allows us to bring our bishop out with a tempo with bishop f5. And now we want to play queen e6, knight d5 and occupy those weak light squares on the center. We then will start gaining space on the queen side and keep improving our position. Let's say white plays queen f4, we play queen e6 and then threaten knight d5. And this was it for the 7th queen a4 line. Let's go back and check out 7 knight e5. Yeah, so on move 7, we go back and check knight e5, which was a headache for most of the black players in this variation. The reason being is that the only move which was considered viable earlier was knight c6, but after knight into c6, or even better bishop c6, bc6, knight c6, with the idea of knight e7, white players have a very good way to press risk-free here. It's objectively fine, but we can't have any winning chances here. And therefore, I suggest playing the very rare knight d5 with the idea of preserving the pawn again with b5. White usually takes back and claims that they have a small space edge in the center, but after b5, we gain space on the queen side and win a tempo. Also, we are threatening to neutralize the g2 bishop with bishop b7 next. After knight e5, we play bb7 and threaten to play c5 on the next move. Therefore, white players usually play queen b3, a6, a4 to stop us from playing c5. But after knight d7, getting the last minor piece into the game, our position is completely alright. Knight d7, queen d7 is not a problem, as the b5 pawn is defended, and we'll try to play c5 on the next move. Whereas after ab5, knight e5, d5, ab5, we have a great position. We have more space in the center, so the only way white can play principally is to take the pawn. But after bishop a6, our bishop improves very significantly, and if we win the pawn on e2, we should have a great position, since all of our pieces are coming into the attack. White therefore plays bishop d5, e d5 and queen d7. But after queen d8, rook d8, the pair of bishops and the activity along with white's poor pawn structure fully compensate for the material. Let's say white plays rook e1, but now we gain space with d4. White plays knight d2, for example, where we play bb4, threaten d3. The pawn on d3 will be a passed pawn if white plays e3. And if white plays e into d3, white then has to deal with this very uncomfortable pin and the attack on the d2 knight. And we still have, in general, we still have great activity in this position and very easy play. Why we are making threats, so the play from a strategic viewpoint should help us since it's much harder to defend than to attack. And that's it for the Catalan part. Let's move on and check out the Gukesh QGD. So coming back to move number 3 with knight c3. This is the starting point of the Gukesh QGD. And the difference between this and the Manhattan is very fine. So firstly, we haven't committed to knight d7 here, which means we can go for c5, knight c6. But from white's point of view, the knight hasn't been committed to f3 yet, which means white can put the knight on e2 later on. From a strategic viewpoint, the other difference is that the plan of c5 queen a5 is a bit more rarer, whereas the threat of playing h6 g5 is much more common in these positions. So let's go and check out the main line with e3, where we play h6, and the main move is obviously bishop h4. We play g5, gain space, force the bishop to go back, and play knight e4. So the way we play in these positions is by making as many threats as we can, since we have accepted a poor pawn structure. White players usually play knight e2 to defend the knight and the bishop on g3. We play h5 here, trying to trap the bishop, and the main move in this position is h4 to stop that. Now, the move I found here was bishop g4, which was a novelty when I found it, but then Fabiano played it against Richard Rappo, I think. Yeah, it was, Rappo played this as white, Fabiano was black at the Vaikanzi, and after that, it became very popular. The idea was we want to play knight g3, gh4 next, which wasn't so great in this position because white had knight into h5. And because of bishop g4, the knight can't recapture, which means white has to play fg3, but that would spoil white's kingside pawn structure. Now there are a few critical moves here, but the strongest one is clearly queen b3. Queen a4 was played by some players, but after knight c6, the queen is misplaced on a4 and would have been better on b3 because the d5 pawn would have been in some pressure. We now just want to play knight g3, move our queen, and castle long. After that, white will have issues with the king in the center. So after queen b3, we still take on g3. After knight g3, we play knight c6. The idea is very straightforward. We want to take on h4. If that's not possible, move the queen and castle long. Knight g2 is the strongest move, which was a novelty, but now has been played by a grandmaster. Some grandmaster played it. I don't remember which one, but I remember checking this out. The move which Rappo played against Fabiano was bishop b5, and this is very ambitious as well. White wants to play queen b4. However, we give up the bishop, and this is one of the very few cases where we give up the bishop where white doesn't play a3. Usually when white plays a3, only then we take, so that white has spent some time unnecessarily. Here we take, and after bc3, queen c3 was played in that game, but after rook h6, followed by getting the queen out, black had a very good position. After bc3, we play gh4, and after knight e2, we go queen g5 with the logical idea of castling long. Knight f4, white's strongest idea. White puts pressure on the center, and we castle long. So the main attempt here is clearly bishop c6, where white is trying to spoil our pawn structure on the queen side. But let's start by checking rook b1. We play bishop f5 here, and that's why rook b1 isn't great, because this allows us to get our piece in with, this bishop on g4 was doing nothing, and suddenly it's back into the game. After rook b2, we now go knight e7, and this bishop on f5 means that we'll have some bishop e4, bishop g4, bishop g2 ideas at some point. It looks like the attack on the queen side might be dangerous, but after queen a4, king b8, we have nothing to be worried about. The bishop may drop back anytime we want, and basically bishop a6 is not a problem, as we can play b6, and there is no way for white to open up the position, while we are just about to open up the king side and keep great chances. Coming back to 17th move, queen a4, with the idea of bishop c6, we play the logical rook h6, the motive which we have already seen, defend the knight, and then threaten a6 on the next move. That brings us to bishop into c6, where we take back with the pawn. And the funny thing is, this pawn structure looks weird, but after king d7, it's actually very strong, since white can't open up the position, and those pawns act as a shield for our king. The two logical moves here are queen a4 and knight d3. Let's start by checking knight d3. White wants to play knight c5 and queen b7, but we play the very strong rook d8, vacating the square for a king, and at the same time threatening a checkmate with rook e3. Don't forget that white's king is still in the center. White usually plays king d2, the strongest move, since you stop rook e3. But after bishop f5, threatening bishop d3 and queen g2, we are already much better. If white plays knight c5, we now play rook into e3 and destroy white's king's cover. fe3, queen g2, and we'll win the rook with queen into h1 on the next move, keeping a good material advantage. And let's say white tries to be clever with it and run away with the king. We just play king d8 with the idea of meeting queen b8 with bishop c8. Everything is secure on the queen side. We'll play queen d6 next and start ruling our h pawn. That brings us to 18th, queen a4. Yes, queen a4. White threatens queen into c6. I'm sorry, yeah. We now bring the other rook into the game and threaten queen into f4. If white castles, we go rook d6 with the idea of opening up the king side with h3. The king will be very secure on d7, and at the same time we are threatening rook f6, rook f4. The position is balanced from a computer point of view, but from a practical viewpoint, black is almost about to win this position, since defending those threats against king side is very, very hard for any player. And that is it for this line with 13th bishop b5. Let's go back and check out knight e2. Here we go queen d6, and after h5, we castle long. Now we want to take the pawn on g5 next and claim that we remain better thanks to the pair of bishops. White doesn't allow this and allows that and play a3, where we keep the bishop with bishop a5. After long castle, white is threatening f3 bishop, knight f4, since white wants to develop this bishop, and thus we play king b8, vacating the c8 square for our bishop. After f3, we go bishop c8, and after knight f4, we go knight e7. The knight not only defends this pawn, but also threatens white's weaknesses on g3 and e3. If white tries to win a pawn, we now open up the center with c5, threatening queen e6, where rook e1 won't be possible due to cd4 and the pin on the e5. After bishop e2, knight f5, we already have a decisive advantage, since all of these squares are weak, and we'll quickly recover the pawn. After that, remain better thanks to the pair of bishops and the weaknesses in white's position. And that is it for these lines with bishop h4 in the Gukesh QGD. Coming to move number 7, I think. Yeah, move 7, bishop h4. If white plays bishop f6 here, we play queen f6 and we have the pair of bishops. White can try playing queen a4 to provoke knight c6, but we still remain better with the pair of bishops. And our idea is to play some, play bishop e6, play bd6, play knight e7, and then launch an attack on the king side. If white plays knight f3, castle, rook c1, bishop e2 is met with bishop e6, and the plan which I discussed on the last move, while rook c1 is met with queen g6, stopping white from developing the bishop comfortably. White players therefore play queen d1 in this position, since a3 is what they want, but after bishop c3, rook c3, we have queen b1 winning the pawn on b2. So queen d1 threatening a3 and covering the b1 square is met with knight e7, where after a3 we want to play bishop a5 and then play c6, bishop c7, get the bishop out and keep the advantage of pair of bishops. The strategic imbalance of the pair of bishops give us a slight advantage in this position. And that sums up the segment on the Gukesh QGD. We now move on to the London system. Let's go back to the second move. Yes. And let's check out the London system starting with bishop f4. So white doesn't play c4 and gain space, but rather than that, brings out a bishop and claims a slight lead in development. After knight f6, our usual setup is going to be e6, c5 and knight c6. There is knight c3, which is the Jobava London, and there is e3, the main London system. So e3, e6, knight f3, c5, and we start by checking out knight bd2, the main line of the London system. Here we go knight c6, and after c3, we play cd, and now white has a choice between ed4 and cd4. Now, usually white players would love to play cd4 and play knight c3 in the position. This is a very common theme in the Slav variation, especially the exchange variation. This line is considered to be very drawish, but there is a very big difference here. That firstly, white's bishop is on f4, not on g5. And the second point is white has committed to knight d2, which means the knight can't land on c3, which is a very active square. Here we go bishop e7 and threaten to win the pair of bishops with knight h5, or just play castle, queen b6, bd7, and get the rook to c8. This position is very, very slightly better for us because the white's knight is on d2 and not on c3. Let's go back and check out the main line with ed4. Here we go knight h5 and force the bishop to move away from the diagonal so that our bishop may come to d6. After bishop e3, we bring out our bishop to the most active square. The idea is to meet bishop d3 with knight f4 and win the pair of bishops and subsequently open up the position later on with f6 and e5 by getting bishop d6 back first. In here, we'll look at bishop b5 and the main move knight e5. Let's start by checking out bishop b5, which was tried by Firo once. White develops a piece and, does not let... The bishop was bad on d3 because that allowed knight f4. With bishop b5, knight f4 is not a threat, but then this bishop is misplaced and we can simply play knight e7, try to win the second bishop. After bishop d3, knight f5, takes, we have a great position due to the pair of bishops and more space in the center. This is a set of double pawns, sure, but it's not easy to attack them and they occupy very important squares. So if the pawns are occupying a good, they control a lot of good squares, having double pawns is not too big of a deal. And because of that, black remains slightly better here. Let's go back and check out knight e5, the main move here, where we play g6 and defend our knight, which was threatened by the queen. Now white's best idea is to play g4, where white gains space and stops the knight g7 f5 maneuver, which is a very typical plan for us in these positions. We still go on to play knight g7 and we are asking white to take on c6, so that after knight c6, bc6, we will have ideas of c5 or e5, and white's position isn't great because of the weak pawn on g4. White therefore has to be fast and play h4. f4 isn't great, as after f6, we force the knight to go back, and this pawn becomes a weakness. At some point in future, we may even play h5, force the pawn to move away from g4, either via gh5 or g5, and then occupy the f5 square with our knight. So h4, this is a very strong move where white is threatening to play h5, h6, and trap our knight. We win a pawn, of course, but white has some compensation after knight f3. By the way, h5 isn't great, as after gh5, we have knight f5, and the knight has come to a very active square, where after which we remain much better due to the extra pawn and the activity of our pieces. White needs to contain the activity of this knight. f4 isn't great as well, as we play bishop b7, bishop c7, with the idea of playing bishop b6 and trading this active set of bishops, giving us a huge advantage. That's why white players needs to play knight f3 here, and we go back to c7 again. Not the most popular move, but the idea is very simple. We want to trade a set of active white pieces. The strongest move for white here is h5, where we take, and white continues making threats with bishop h6. We go rook g8 and threaten gf4, followed by knight f5 and improving the position of our knight. White can't allow that, and thus you played rook g1, in the only OTB game in this position. The idea is after hg4, white has rook g4, and we are not able to play knight f5 due to the pin. And therefore, I suggest playing this incredible novelty, king e7, defending the rook on g8, and now threatening h into g4. White players usually play queen d3. Not usually play, I'm sorry for that. The strongest and the most natural move seems to be queen d3, with the idea of playing queen h7. But here, we reroute our knight with knight e8 and look to play knight f6 on the next move. After gh5, we play knight f6, and we are a pawn up. We have defended our threats against our king, and we have more space in the center. Rook g8, queen g8, bishop g5 is a possible trying to exploit the pin, but here we give back a pawn for activity, and the claim is that if you take, the bishop has moved away from the diagonal, and we can improve the position of our knight, and subsequently putting pressure on white's pieces. If white goes bishop h4, we go queen g4, and we are threatening not only queen h5, but defending the knight with queen f4. We'll then now play bd7 and finish our development, and black's position is very comfortable due to the extra pawn and the shield in front of our king. White has compensation, sure, but we don't have anything to be worried about in this position. And that brings us an end to this main line of the London system. We now go back to move number 5, where white can try playing c3 instead of knight bd2. We still go knight c6. Knight d2 transposes to what we have checked, while bishop d3 runs into knight h5, where we try to win the bishop. As usual, we are trying to win the pair of bishops, as it's a strategic advantage for a side. White has an interesting try in bishop e5, where we play f6, force the bishop to go back, and control the e5 square. Now we go queen b6 and challenge white's weakness on b2. If white's queen's defended, we play g6, and at some point we'll play bg7, knight g3, win the bishop, and then push e5, gaining space in the center. And that is it for the 5c3 line. And we now go on and check out 5c4. With c4, white is gaining space, but the drawback is you allow us to make an isolated pawn in the center with cd. ed4 isn't great, as white has an isolated pawn. So knight d4, but now we play knight d7, threatening to win a piece by playing e5 on the next move. Knight b5 isn't great, as after e5, we gain a tempo over the bishop and now threaten to play queen a5 on the next move, giving us a very comfortable position. And this was a brief summary on the London system. We now move on and check out the Jobava London. Let's go back. Bishop f4, knight f6, and knight c3. This is the Jobava London, where white wants to play knight b5, but I find this knight to be a bit misplaced. We just play e6 and threaten to play bishop b4 and spoiling the pawn structure with short castle. Bishop into c3 and then short castle. Knight f3 isn't great, as after c5, e3, a6, we are looking to gain space with b5 on the next move. Therefore, white should play knight b5 here, and we go bb4 check with the idea of meeting c3 with bishop a5 and now defending the pawn. We next want to kick the knight away with a6 and then play knight d7 or queen e7 and c5, challenging white's center. We can also play bishop c7 and try to, trade. I am very bad with arrows. Bishop c7 and trade the pair of bishops. Arjun and Prag played e3 in this position, where we go a6, knight a3 and knight d7, looking to play c5 at some point, knight f3. Now we can't play c5 because of dc5, knight c5 and b4. So we finish our development with castle first. Bishop e2, bishop d3 now runs into c5, as after dc5, knight c5, the knight is threatening to win the bishop. Bishop e2, and now we go for queen e7 with the idea that after c5, white doesn't have the option of dc5 anymore, since we have knight c5 and b4 runs into knight e4, where there is an x-ray on this diagonal and on the knight specifically. White plays usually castle here. h3 runs into c5, while castle is met with knight h5 and not c5, because if we play c5, white has c4 and we have some uncomfortable issues to deal with because of cd5 and knight c4. It's very much possible to play, but I find trying to win the pair of bishops with knight h5 much stronger. After bishop g5, we play f6. After bishop h4, we go g5. And after bishop g3, we go f5 and gain maximum space. We then want to take on g3 and just put pressure on white's position by maybe creating an attack with g4, h5, h4 in the future. And that ends the segment on the Jobava London. We now move on to a version of Trompovsky. Not exactly Trompovsky, but a version of it. What do I mean by that? So Trompovsky is usually d4 and f6, bishop g5. To avoid this, we start with a d4, d5 move order. Now this bishop g5 move doesn't make much sense because there is nothing to attack to. Here, the pawn on b2 is vulnerable, which we try to exploit by playing c5. We have ideas of queen b6, queen b2, or winning the center with cd4. If white plays dc5, which was an interesting try introduced by Firouzja, we just go h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3, and now the weakness of b2 is glaring. We play bishop g7, and now we have great space in the center, and we'll recover the pawn very quickly. White players usually play e3 here, and we develop a piece and attack the pawn on c5 with knight a6. Knight d7 isn't great as we lose a pawn, and so we go for knight a6. Now, if we recover the pawn, we should have a great position because of the extra space in the center. Therefore, white players usually should try to play queen a4 check with the idea of beating bishop d7 with queen a3 to stop us from winning the pawn. But the queen on a3 is very, very misplaced, and we can play queen c8, provoke b4, and now play knight c7. We are threatening knight b5 and b6 to put pressure on the c file, while after queen b2, white's queen has moved a lot. We have developed 3 minor pieces while white has 1 minor piece developed, and now we can go for, we start by f5, threatening f4 to win the bishop, and after e3, we go e5 with a chunk of pawns in the center. Our idea is to push pawns with f4 and maybe get our pieces into the attack with knight e7, knight g6, then other knight to e6, then ruling these pawns in some manner. We can also play b6 to open up the c file, and then the rook targets the a2 square while the queen targets the c3 square. And black has a very comfortable position here thanks to the amount of threats we are making here. And that sums up the quick starter part.